Toy Story 4 was released this weekend, and I did my Toy Story ranking, but now I'm going to rank all of the Pixar films from the worst to the best. So coming in at last place is WALL-E. This movie's biggest crime is that it's just boring. The love story between the last two robots on Earth is still very cute, but it's an hour of the movie without any dialogue, and if they were just going to do that, it should have just been a short film. And when it gets to the second half, when stuff actually happens, it's just a ripoff of 2001: A Space Odyssey, with the evil robot pilot, and even the score from 2001 playing as the pilot takes his first steps. And I just cannot believe that this beat both Kung Fu Panda and Bolt, which were two vastly superior films at the 2009 Oscars. Number 20, The Good Dinosaur. It's visually impressive, and that's about it. The story is kind of generic. This movie was actually delayed by about 2 years because they wanted to change the story around. The original story was supposed to be about humans domesticating the dinosaurs and using them as farm equipment and pets. And it was supposed to have all these big stars like Neil Patrick Harris, but as dumb as the original plot of this movie sounds, it still sounds better than the plot we actually got, which is just a ripoff of Finding Nemo and The Lion King. Nothing about this movie is particularly memorable or stands out, and it's very forgettable. Number 19, Brave. This is just trying to replicate and imitate Disney's princess movies. I think what happened was that Pixar was so surprised at the massive success of Tangled and the How to Train Your Dragon movies from DreamWorks that they said, hey, we can kind of do that. And what we get is basically just Scottish Mulan mixed with a plot that's basically just a copy of Brother Bear, so much so that my nickname for this movie is actually Mother Bear. This movie also had a lot of production problems due to creative differences with the script, and man, does it show. Number 18, A Bug's Life. Ironically, for a movie with the word life in the title, it's actually pretty lifeless. This movie is also very cynical and mean-spirited, especially for a kid's movie, and the plot is just a copy of The Three Amigos, and that's really all I have to say about it, because there's not much to say about this movie, because it's not that much of a film. Number 17, Cars 2. The spy stuff in this movie is pretty cool, but that's it. This has the problem that Despicable Me 2 has, where it takes the comic relief characters, such as the Minions, or in this movie, Mater, and it makes the whole movie about them. Mater was just kind of an okay character in the first movie, and here he's kind of the equivalent to Jar Jar Binks. This movie also has a very weird mixture of tone that just doesn't match up. It's trying to be a fun racing movie made to sell toys to 6-year-olds, since the merchandise from the first Cars movie generated billions, and the movie itself kind of underperformed at the box office, so the merchandise kind of made up the difference by a lot. But then you get scenes of gun violence, and even a scene where a spy car is tortured to death, and it still manages to get a G rating because they're animated cars, even though if they were live-action humans, it would be an R. Number 16, Finding Dory. How fitting that a film where the main character forgets things is itself pretty forgettable. Nothing about this movie is particularly memorable, and it seemed almost beat for beat of the first movie, and it's one of the most unnecessary sequels that Pixar has ever done. Number 15, Monsters University. Again, as with Finding Dory and Cars 2, this movie's pretty unnecessary. Mike and Sully are already friends in Monsters, Inc., so to do a prequel that shows how they went from enemies to friends seems unnecessary. It's still a very fun film, but there's just not as much heart put into this one as there was in Monsters, Inc. Now, they announced recently that the Monsters, Inc. franchise is getting a TV show called Monsters at Work on Disney's upcoming streaming service, and since this film ends with Mike and Sully trying to work their way up from the mailroom to becoming Scare employees, it makes me think this is probably just a pilot episode for that. Number 14, Incredibles 2. This is one of the most disappointing sequels to a film I've ever seen. Considering they had almost 15 years to make this film, the script should have been a lot stronger, but all the character development from the first movie is absolutely thrown out the window, and the aspect that made the first film unique, a family of superheroes working together, is used as an afterthought for the last third of the movie, so the movie can just be an Elastigirl story. It should not have been called Incredibles 2, it should have just been called Elastigirl. The only really good things in this movie were the scenes with Jack Jack, but even those just kind of feel like that should have just been a short placed before a much better Pixar film. Number 13, Cars 3. This movie is better than Cars 2 because it goes back to the racetrack and feels more like a true sequel to Cars rather than just a Mater spin-off film. In fact, Mater's only in the movie for like 5 minutes. But what annoys me about this film is the retreading of how much it does the first one. Lightning McQueen just basically plays the role of Doc Hudson in the first movie, and the character of Cruz is just a female version of who Lightning was in the first film. And the third act twist of Cruz finishing Lightning's race for him is just kind of stupid and out of nowhere. But I at least had fun with most of the first 2 acts. Number 12, Cars. It's a pretty forgettable movie by Pixar standards. Even as a kid, I didn't enjoy this movie very much. It was never my first choice for watching a Pixar movie. But I don't hate it. The story's kind of okay, although there is some heart put into it. It's about half as much as some of Pixar's other films. It doesn't quite go all the way with how much it could have. Number 11, Ratatouille. This is such a bizarre premise, but yet it somehow works, and it shows why Brad Bird is one of Pixar's greatest storytellers, and why his original stories, along with his aversion to sequels, are why I have a lot of respect for him. The critic's monologue at the end about how people are often unkind to new talent is one of the most well-written scenes of any Pixar film, and the visuals are just stunning. Number 10, Up. The first 10 minutes alone tell a beautiful, complete story, and if it were just those first 10 minutes, it would still be an amazing short film. But since the feature-length film, stuff that follows after the exposition are also very heartwarming, with somewhat heavy themes of death and moving on and finding a new family after being alone for so long. This is one of the most mature, thought-provoking, tear-jerking, and beautiful Pixar films. Number 9, Toy Story. The first ever completely computer-animated film that set the standard and changed the animation industry as we know it. This is a very simple story about two toys competing to be their child's favorite, who end up lost and have to put aside their differences to work together to get home, which is a somewhat done-to-death premise, with they don't like each other, but then they have to put aside their differences and work together, and they finally do like each other. It's kind of done to death, but yet in this film it's still somehow very fresh, with lots of heart and humor that's completely changed what everyone thought about animated films could be, and suddenly every major studio wanted to make their film the next Toy Story. Speaking of which, number 8, Toy Story 2. Considering this is a sequel to an animated film made during a time where those were all considered failures and cheap cash grabs, it seemed Pixar could not replicate the success of the first one, or even outdo themselves, and we were dead wrong. This is even better than the first film, with more emotion, deeper, more mature themes, and a more complex villain. Number 7, Finding Nemo. With one of the darkest, most shocking opening scenes in any animated film, this is one of the more mature Pixar films that, while kids can enjoy it, is really more for the parents watching the film with them. With themes of having to let your kid grow up, make mistakes, and learn from them instead of being an overprotective helicopter parent, this is one of the deeper, no pun intended because it takes place in the ocean, Pixar films. Number 6, Toy Story 4. I was super skeptical about this movie. I thought 3 had a perfect ending, and this made me cry perhaps even more than 3 did. With the third one being about Andy having to let go of his childhood, this one was Woody having to do the same thing with Andy. With fun, funny new characters, themes of not always being able to get what you want in life, finding your purpose, and letting go of the past, this is one of the more complex, deeper Pixar films. The only reason Toy Story 3 is higher on this list is because there's a plot hole that drives me nuts that I won't reveal here, but it's in the spoiler review if you're interested or if you've already seen it. Number 5, Toy Story 3. After 11 years, we finally get what we thought was at the time the conclusion to the Toy Story trilogy, and it was well worth the wait. Themes of growing up and a second half that turns into a prison break movie and takes a very dark turn. This is one of Pixar's best made films. Number 4, Monsters, Inc. When this movie was coming out, I was around 3 or 4 years old, and when my mom heard the premise for this movie, she was very skeptical this was actually going to be a kid's movie. Monsters scaring kids is their job? They're telling kids there's monsters in their closets waiting to scare them? Have Pixar and Disney lost their marbles? Who thought this was a good idea for a kid's film? I was an impressionable 4-year-old at the time. I understand her concern, but this movie turned out to be so charming and heartwarming, and it has one of the most tearjerker endings of any Pixar film. It has great jokes and a surprise villain twist. Number 3, Inside Out. This is a very complex kids film that they can still understand. This film really helps kids learn about and deal with their emotions, told through very abstract metaphors that are still kept simple enough for them to understand. Everyone in this movie is perfectly cast, whether it be Amy Poehler as Joy, Phyllis Smith as Sadness, or any of the other actors they chose to voice the different emotions. You really feel like each of them was born to play this role, and it has some very sweet, tender moments that even the adults cry at. Number 2, Coco. This is one of the most heartfelt, tear-jerking, beautiful Pixar films that really makes you think about your family, your past, your legacy, and we are all connected through our family's history. It's bright and silly enough to entertain kids, but yet mature and deep enough to entertain the adults, and it makes you feel something and also evaluate yourself, which is great storytelling. Number 1, the number 1 Pixar film, in my opinion, is The Incredibles. This takes the classic superhero media of the 50s and 60s and mixes it with kind of the spy thriller, kind of James Bond feeling, with themes of sticking by your family, working together, and even revenge. This is the best Pixar film. It's the most exciting, the most well-written, and the most entertaining. Out of all of them, this is the one I was definitely clamoring for a sequel for the most. So it's a shame that that sequel ended up putting less than half the effort this one did, and ended up with a very direct-to-video feel. This is also the last Pixar film that was distributed before Disney completely bought them out, and it shows. The first film released after the Disney buyout of Pixar was Cars 1, and everything since then has been very hit or miss. since I don't think Disney is allowing Pixar as much creative control as they did before this film came out. This is one of the films I never get tired of, no matter how many times I watch it, and it makes me wonder how much better Incredibles 2 could have been if Disney hadn't bought out Pixar. So, what's your list? What is your favorite Pixar movie? Let me know in the comments.